Hello, we've just seen you. There's a lot of you connecting, and now the number of participants is increasing. There's a lot of you, and welcome to this first webinar of a series of AI webinars launched by Dentons. This time we will be talking about the challenges and opportunities of AI and overcoming the lack of trust. We will first start having a broader view and possibly also long-term view, and then we will go more and more vertical with our next webinars. There's a first trilogy of webinars, and then others will follow up, addressing all the areas that we've been discussing also with our Dentons AI guide. But before starting, I really want to thank those that organized this webinar. So a big thank you to Daria Nazarova, to Marcela Comenza, and also to our Chiara Bocchi that really helped us in making this happen. And also thanks to Alison Bender, who's the co-host with me today and will be presenting with me this webinar. Alison is our expert on AI and cybersecurity based in Washington. And also a very big thank you also to our esteemed guests. So today we do have Paolo Bernanke and Brando Benifei. Paolo Bernanke is a professor of theology of the Gregorian University in Rome. But besides this, he's also a member of a number of commissions at the European and Italian level. He was also a member of the 30 expert commissions to devise the strategy on AI in Italy. And whilst Brando Benifei is the co-rapporteur to the AI regulation, and he's one of the youngest, if not the youngest, European MPs. We all happen, I mean, the three of us, we happen all to be Italian, but that's a coincidence because this is meant to be a global webinar. And as I know, Paolo, his thoughts are always more global than national, and we will be asking to continue with this approach. A little bit of housekeeping rules. This is a public event. This will be recorded, so obviously we cannot see anything that is confidential, and all the attendees can use the Q&A feature to ask any question. We will be trying to moderate them. We will be trying to address them all. We will not be able to address them all, given the numbers of participants, but we will try them to address separately also with subsequent webinars. This webinar is the result, and it's part of a long journey from Dentons on AI, which will continue. It continue with our tools. It will continue with yet more surveys and AI guides. So that said, I hope I've not forgotten anything on housekeeping, and I would leave the floor to our Alison Bender. Up to you, Alison.
Thank you so much, and it's such a pleasure to be a part of this presentation today, and also to share with the audience here some of the results from the Dentons global survey and some of the additional initiatives that we're taking on. Just briefly, I think this group is very well familiar with AI, but artificial intelligence is leveraging computers and machines to mimic problem solving of human minds, but in an accelerated way. The most common use cases that we're seeing include customer relationship management, administration, and sales. However, really the possibilities in many ways are endless, and really much of its origin, identifying snow leopards as part of counting endangered species, really just leaves the mind with a number of possibilities for creative uses. As Gianji mentioned, our survey really encompassed a wide range of professionals, over 200 business leaders from around the world, beginning in September of 2021, so very fresh data. We also sought additional feedback from nearly 700 LinkedIn respondents. And with that data in January, we published our AI guide and put together our Knowledge Hub, where you'll find many of the resources discussed today and additional tools and content that'll be provided to you later. As Jianji mentioned, today is the first of our webinar trilogy, but we'll be having other events in March and towards the end of April. I'm very pleased to be a part of kicking off this trilogy with you. In terms of some of the key factors that we identified as a result of the survey, nearly 60% of our respondents were using AI already in some form. Quite a bit of use still beginning. 23% were still in the process of formulating their strategic response to the use of AI. And so businesses that are already participating still are very much on the cusp of how this technology will be applied. We're seeing this as a critical issue for all organizations across every sector and geography, which of course presents both challenges and opportunities for our clients. 83% of organizations that were participating in our survey identified cost as a primary challenge to the implementation of artificial intelligence, but there were a number of other factors that were considered as either opportunities or challenges. 55 to 75% of respondents weren't aware of relevant legislation in their jurisdiction, or whether even if any such legislation existed. 63% weren't able to identify which public body is empowered to regulate or monitor AI in their country. And part of this is because the legislative and regulatory landscape is rapidly changing. We've seen the introduction of legislation, of reports, of guidance in Europe and really around the world. So it's quite a dynamic space in terms of legal requirements and industry practice. Particularly important for today, when we think about uses of AI and overcoming that trust barrier, 57% of respondents did express concern regarding the potential for discrimination from the use of AI. 81% thought that human oversight is needed. What does that mean in terms of liability, decisions, omissions made by AI? How will that be supervised in a strategic and legal framework going forward? 68% of respondents believed that lack of trust in AI was one of the most significant challenges that they would need to overcome. But businesses are already pressing forward. AI is being used now. It is not the future, it is very much the present. And businesses really are seeking guidance primarily internally. 82% are looking to their legal and compliance teams, 75% to IT. So in many ways, this is a cross-disciplinary approach to technology and its applications to be able to overcome those challenges and benefit from the opportunities that AI could provide. When we think about the full spectrum of key AI issues in terms of implementation, everything from sourcing, partnerships and distribution, data protection, privacy and security by design, what that legal framework looks like, financing it, intellectual property. You know, if you disclose how all of the decisions are made by your algorithms, are you still able to protect your investment in that intellectual property? And then of course, governance and ethics by design, which is the focus of our discussion today. All of these materials and more are available on our Knowledge Hub and described more fully in the global survey that is available on that website. But I'd really love to get into our conversation with our presenters, with Jianji leading the questions for today. And so with that, I'd love to kick it back to you for our presentation today.
Thank you, Alison. And by the way, well done, because whilst you were speaking, the numbers of attendees increased instead of reducing. So when lawyers are speaking, this is a very, very good point. And I assume that we'll increase even more now that we have Paolo. We will start with Paolo Bernanke, so eminent professor at the Gregorian University, but also well-known technologist and theologist. It's very difficult to put the two things together. And actually, what we've been trying to do with Denton is to follow actually some of your thoughts. We've been trying to promote an ethical approach from the bottom, in a way, in the sense that we've been starting to push through the community of companies that we've been assisting an approach that is in line with certain ethics applied to technology. And this actually resulted in the AI guides, and also thanks also to your contribution to the guide. But in this respect, I would really want to start with one question. First of all, you are the one that created the name algorithmics. In the dictionary, we do have a dictionary with a name created by you. I mean, that would be pretty flattering for me. But why creating the term algorithmics, and what are the biggest challenges for AI? And then I will add what's got to do, because I've heard you speaking before, AI with Central Park.
Okay, good morning to everyone. Thank you for having me. It's for me exciting and an honor, the ability to speak in that kind of webinar. You know, every word comes from the experience. There is an old experience that comes from linguistic studies that say that usually Nordic people, like the Eskimos or the Southern people, where there is a lot of snow, are almost 20 different words to describe the snow. So when you use different words, it's because you have different experience of reality. And if we need a different word to describe an ethical approach to ethics of AI, probably because something is changing. To make short a long story, ethics is long as the human beings, because we are free, and so we can do something or do something different. In that perspective, ethical is the choice that tries to align our desire to the good. When we talk about technology, the first use of ethics for technology was all concentrated on the hand of the user. So if you have an hammer, it's not an hammer in itself that is good or bad, but it's the hands that use it. And it could be a wonderful tool to open a coconut, or could be the really bad weapon to open the skull of an opponent. Well, when the engineer and when the techniques go on, we start to discover another way to approach in medical perspective. And the way is simple, the professional ethics or engineer ethics. If I sell you something like a fancy supercar that is able to go to 300 kilometers per hour, it's really ethical if I give you also a good pair of brakes to stop what I sold you. And this is another form in which everything is made in a form of honesty between what I sell and what is the best practice and what you get. Still, it's depending in which way you can drive to know if you are ethically driving or not. But after that, there is a new stage in the development of technology. This new stage of development of technology asks or requires a new experience of ethics. Probably the best example of the new form of ethics of technology arise from what a famous politicians in Manhattan did. Richard Moses is the politician that in the 50s simply shaped the city, the landscape of the city as the one that we know when we go for work or as a tourist. The wonderful landscape of Manhattan is connected to what Richard Moses did. Well, if you go and see in Manhattan, New York, the wonderful parkway, the 6-lane highway that is used to connect Manhattan to Long Island, you can discover something that is really uncommon. Probably if me and you and me was watching the street, we see simple concrete and asphalt. But if we go back to the biography Richard Moses. There is a huge 1,000-page biography written by Robert Caro that won a Pulitzer Prize for that. We can discover that Richard Moses was a politician with deeply convinced political perspective. Probably some of his ideas today will be considered not polite and not applied, but at that time was really practical and I would like to say common to have the vision that he has. The vision of Moses was that the best part of the city has to be for the best part of population. And according to his sensibility, the best part of population at the time was the white middle class. Let me say once again, today probably we cannot accept something like that, but that time was really common. So Richard Moses tried to keep Long Island as the part for the best side part of the city. To do that, he didn't realize any form of public transportation like train. And he asked that the concrete bridge on the highway was built 2 feet lower than the standard. In that way, no public buses can go to the beach. Only the owners of a personal car can go to the beach. At the time, it was just a privilege of the white middle class. Well, the ethics of technology, when technology is not just a tool, it's not just a machine, but is an infrastructure, simple try to underline that every form of infrastructure is a form of order, is a displacement of power. It's curious that if you look up the way in which electrical power was distributed in the early years of the 19th century, we have Samuel Insull for General Electric Company that follow up a model that is cut down the price so the family can spread the use of electricity. If you go back to URSS, Lenin in the first Goelro, the first strategical 5-year plan, make a plan to distribute electrical power because he was convinced that the electrical power will drive communism in Russia. And so there is no neutral approach to the way in which you drive innovation inside the community. Well, it's not anymore matter of electrical power. It's not anymore matter of concrete and asphalt. And because we are talking about algorithm, the distribution of power and also the organizing of society is made by this form of algorithm. Like every one of us probably discovered when we try to apply to get a vaccination shot, in which was an algorithm that say yes or no, or when we try to apply for borrowing money from a bank, in which is a risk assessment algorithm that simple say yes or no. So if ethics is the quality of the human beings that say that a use could be aligned or not aligned to the good, why we need an algorithms? Because as human beings, we are still in charge to have the ethics, to produce the ethics. But this form of ethics has to be understandable, if you allow me to use this word, by a machine. It has to be like a guardrail that keep the car inside the truck. So algorithms is simple this, it's bridging this human ability to foresee different use and different effect and give to the machine the ability to not exceed from the correct track. Well, I'm talking to people that is connected to business, and probably someone could think that this use of ethics could be an offending of business. So let me use another example. Move back to New York City. Yes, I love that city. At the late 18th century, in New York City, Central Park was built. It was acquired by the municipality for $5 million. 1,600 people worked there, and a lot of family was pushed away to build this park that is actually a sculpture because there is stone that has to be modeled to make Central Park. If you are in a real estate business, you could think that the Central Park is a no business zone. And so if Central Park is a metaphorical way to say ethics, the first reaction is ethics is a no business zone. Okay, that could be an interpretation of ethics, but actually is a misunderstanding and a mistake. Look what happened with Central Park. The value of the land, the last estimation that we have was the early 2015, is $500 trillion. The second thing is that the value of the real estate that are facing to Central Park is rocket stellar. So what happened is that ethics is something that if it's not by design, Later could be too costly to be achieved. Look at what happened with GDPR and United States company that refused to play in Europe for the cost. And the second thing is that a well-designed ethics give value to the business. So this to drive is what I try to describe and offer to the Benton readers inside the guide that you publish.
Thank you, Paolo. I think this is brilliant. I think you really gave us the idea that actually ethics and an ethical approach is actually an opportunity for businesses and not the other way around. But I do actually have another question, and I've noted there's also Mr. Benifei just joined us. So welcome and thank you. We understand that your agenda is packed with institutional engagement. So really thank you for being with us today. We're really honored. And but just continue with your line of thoughts, Paolo, because you said we need certain rules. First of all, I would say, well, if we set up ethical rules, also us as lawyers help us, our clients to set up guidelines for governance in which are with some ethical elements, but which ethics, who determines them? Because that's really the big question. And secondly, what could you do to help to build trust in AI? Because that's really the big question at the moment.
Well, the first question is a human-long question. So let me suggest this way. Probably, if I say ethics, especially to a lawyer, the first understanding of ethics is a sort of norm. Let me say that is not the 100% of ethics, because the ethics arise with Aristotle's as virtues. So if I have to ask you, would you like to prefer a just AI or a not just AI? I think that 100% of people will answer just. Then, how much is just? Okay, this is a second problem, but start from why. Why is we need a just AI. And trustable is a form of virtues, So if we would like a trustable AI, we have to apply virtues to that. This is a form of algorithm. The second thing is that I aware, this is not the place where to have this discussion because it's too long, but as a philosopher, I'm really aware that we have a problem with normative in our society, especially after World War II, in which after the extermination of Jewish, some Nazis say, I simply obey to the order. Western culture has a sort of not so good feeling with everything that is normative in society. Well, but this is a normative that we can understand as an assumption given by a form of authority. So let me use a metaphorical example. Coming back to the car that we saw before. A kind of this norm is like the speed limits. And yes, I'm biased, I'm an Italian, I have a really bad relationship with the speed limits. So supposing that I'm driving alone in a street, in a country, with no one on the street, and the speed limit is 30 kilometers per hour. If I go 40, what happens? So if the ethical norm is something like that, it's simple a convention, and convention cannot be worldwide spread. Now, be back to the car. We all knows that the car works because we put fuel inside the engine. Now, there is another norm that says that if you don't put the fuel inside the engine will not work. So ethics is not a convention. Ethics is an operation that starts from describing reality, and then it's prescribing in force of the description of the reality. So if I tell you have to put fuel inside the engine, that is like an ethical norm. You could not agree, but otherwise it does not work. If we don't put trustworthy AI inside AI, it will not work. People will not use. It's not something that it's able to give the advantage that we would like to have. Okay, this is a really surface explanation of a really deep field, but you know, a word like algorithmics means a lot of chapter in a book.
Sorry, I was muted and I said yes. And I understand that we've asked you to say in very few minutes what actually would need hours. And what I do understand is the point that these are really fundamental points, because for us, in order to be very practical and proactive in giving advice, we really need to have these notions very, very clear. It's not a matter of directions in terms of the ethics. It's also a matter of understanding of what are the implications. I recall when we were working together on the commission that you were saying, and we were discussing very practical things. We were saying, well, if we were to devise a strategy, do we protect the man or the planet? You know, you need to have very clear where to start from, and you have clear ideas. But now, thanks, Paolo, I move to Brando Benifei, who's the co-rapporteur to the AI Acts at the European Parliament. And I think you are, Brando, correct me if I'm wrong, you are the youngest MP in Europe, right? Is this correct, or did I get it wrong? Okay.
Yeah. I'm one of the youngest second-term MEP, because I'm not so young. I'm almost a veteran now.
Okay.
8 years in this place.
Okay, so you were the youngest. Okay, and then
I was. I'm still one of the youngest in general, and for sure among the second-term MEPs.
Excellent. And well, first of all, welcome, Brando. And and we've been discussing it as before you were attending. We just saying what are the purpose of these webinars. We first start from a really high-level view, and then we will go more and more vertical also with few webinars. But we need to get some common ideas right. And in this case, in your case, first of all, you've been given the difficult job, because being the co-rapporteur with regards to the AI Act, which will be the first real act on trying to regulate in artificial intelligence, I think it's quite a significant responsibility. But so we have a few questions for you. First of all, because someone else asked that, what does it mean, co-rapporteur? So if you can tell us, and what is your experience, what you've been doing, but then what actually the challenges you've been identifying with the Parliament on the when ruling on AI and new technologies, because we've just said, you know, there's some big choices to make, and all these choices will affect not just us as advisors of companies. This is just a really, really little part, but it will really affect our lives, and certain things that actually that Paolo was mentioning before about a long past are actually very actual. And I think regulator on AI now, seeing what is happening, is becoming more and more relevant. So, Brando, what is a co-rapporteur to start with?
Yes, thank you for inviting me. It means that I am one of the 2 MEPs with the role of negotiating directly with the council, so the member states, and with the commission on the text, because the legislative procedure implies that the commission has proposed a draft text of this AI Act, and then the European Parliament will propose its amendments, will vote its amended version, and the Council will do the same. So the Council of the Member States. And we will then confront our 2 versions of the text, see where we have differences, because we made different amendments, and we will try to, in the needed time, to find a compromise so that there is a final single text. This is how the legislative process works. This means that we need first a Parliament position realistically it will be by the end of 2022, and then in 2023 we'll be negotiating with the Council to have a final text. Being the co-rapporteur means that me and the colleague Tudorache from Romania will be leading the work with the other representatives of the various political groups to first present a batch of amendments that are a bit more consensual, then a second series of amendments by each of us, and then we will need to lead the work for finding compromises between different amendments proposals, so that we can have some blocks of amendments that we can bring to the committee vote, and then two committees are involved as leading committees: IMCO, my committee, the internal market, and the colleagues committee, that is the LIBE committee, the Committee on Civil Liberties. We will then have a version of the text from the committees that will be brought to the plenary, and then it will be approved. And then also the second phase, when we negotiate with the council, it will be me and the colleague that will lead the negotiating team with so the government's on the other side of the table. This is our work. It's a big work, especially for a regulation, because we are talking about real legislation, not like political statements. This is something that has immediate impact with no adaptation, because it's a regulation, not a directive. So it's immediately applicable when it is approved. So we are concentrating on this. Personally, I don't take and I don't have any other legislative responsibility since I took the AI Act. I do other things. I'm also the leader of my own party in the European Parliament, but I don't do as legislator singularly any other work on legislation, because this is obviously a quite committing work to be done.
Well, it's a huge job and a huge responsibility. And by the way, you just told us that, so we could be expecting a final text by 2023, which would be a good time, because in the meantime the technology is evolving, and also the relationship evolving. So between blocks and other countries are actually developing a lot in terms of AI, and we do need to speak with these countries outside of Europe and being able to find some common grounds. And I do understand that we are not at the final version of the AI Act. And by the way, in future webinars, we will be addressing certain parts of the AI Act. But according to you, what should not be changed and what actually should change in your personal view, if you can say?
Well, I think that we see issues where that are not going to be changed. Others that will be changed also with possible different views with the council. For example, I'm sure that we will, as Parliament, we will support an amendment that we know the council will present on extending the social scoring ban also to private entities, so to forbid the use of AI to make classification of citizens for illegal uses, and which is being done in other parts of the world. For sure, we are considering from the side of the Parliament that the self-certification for some of the users that can be considered high risk might deserve instead external scrutiny, given their complexity and the possible negative effects on fundamental rights. Probably this needs to be involved when we deal with users that are not only high risk, but are regarding life, health, family issues, citizenship status. We should have an extra extra ex-ante certification when we deal with issues that can in fact destroy life of another human being if dealt in an erroneous way. Also, we are thinking of changes the way sandboxes are designed, so the spaces for innovation and experimentation outside of the legislative framework, to provide greater flexibility for companies. And also we are, one thing that we don't want to be changed on what is already there is the ban to real-time biometric recognition, which we will look at the exceptions that are there for law enforcement, but we don't want the practice to be generally adopted, which might create a lot of problems in terms of control over life of citizens. So we, and also one last point I might be useful to mention is that I'm convinced that the Council will also support, like we do, a modification on the proposal of the Commission that requires the data sets to be, for the high risk, to be without error. We know this is an excessive and impossible request for companies, so we will not for sure leave that formulation there, because we think we cannot request a error-free data set. So as you see, there are aspects where we expect to be in line with the Council, others where we will make proposals to change and we will then need to negotiate, others where we are in line with the Commission, like the biometric surveillance ban.
And thank you very much. So actually this is very clear, and you gave us also some good directions on future developments, because where there's some agreement with other parts of the institution, it's more likely there will not be some significant changes. This is different in the other side, but I would, if you allow me, I would ask you a question that we've been asking from a different perspective to Paolo as well. Because to Paolo, we've asked from an ethical perspective, what is the biggest challenge when dealing with AI? And for you, as a regulator, we all know that it's very difficult to regulate technologies. There's each time a new law comes up, there's always the list of commentators that says this is already obsolete and so forth. It's a bit of a fashion, I have to say. But we also know that obviously laws need to be technology neutral. And what were, from your perspective, the biggest challenges you have to face when dealing with regulating AI? And by the way, I remind also our attendees that can ask questions in the Q&A panel, and we'll be able to moderate them. So, Brando, which challenges?
Yeah, we can say that the fact that artificial intelligence covers different sectors, and above all, it's not something that is yet fully known. This is one of the biggest challenges. It is like this so much that scientists and engineers themselves are amazed often by outputs produced by AI systems. As you know, the Parliament normally works through ad hoc committees such as the Economic Affairs, Agriculture, Employment. In this case, we have to regulate something that will have an impact on all sectors, which is why the negotiations, but also the drafting of the regulation itself, are particularly complex. In this case, more than ever, it's important to consult with all stakeholders, both from industry and civil society, in order to have a comprehensive picture of possible unexpected effects that artificial intelligence and its regulation will have in the coming years. For sure, for example, the GDPR has certainly prepared the field for a type of regulation based more on principles such as accountability and transparency, and on risk-based approaches, which are useful when it's not possible to act very specifically on every single sector. So a crucial point will be to have a legislation that is adaptable, that has flexibility to update itself when things will change, because AI is still a very developing field in itself. And the Parliament, to act on this, we can say, horizontal nature of the topic, has prepared itself for this legislative work that we are doing, of which I'm one of the leading MEPs. It has prepared itself with a 1 year of a special committee on artificial intelligence, of which I'm also one of the main members. We are going to produce very soon a kind of final vision paper on AI that will be very encompassing and will also touch on the direction that we will take with this legislation, but also with other legislation that will come. For example, the liability AI, a liability for AI products, which is not part of this regulation. And we will still have also, for example, the issue of permanent training, lifelong learning on AI, which is also only partially taken care of in this legislation. So the Parliament has been working on it also from a more vision and political point of view. But now we are also very much working on the concrete legislation, as I was explaining, with this AI Act.
Thank you. Really thank you. And I'm starting now getting also some questions, and also through the Q&A. And there's one question about, as you know, with the, which is, by the way, very good news to hear about also having an additional vision on AI from the Parliament, which, by the way, we've already had bits and pieces of this vision on various acts and positions, including the one on diplomacy of AI from the EU Parliament, which I thought was extremely forward-thinking. But as you know, the Commission published the AI white paper, and in addition to a lot of elements that we've then saw further expanded in the AI Act, there was also a lot about policy measures for promoting trust and promoting AI and helping knowledge centers and helping companies to work with AI. Is this something that has been considered within the vision? Because the feeling is, within at least a certain European environment, is that we are a bit losing the race, the golden race, with other geopolitical blocks. Do you have the same feeling? Is this something you believe that something more can be done to help companies?
Yes, I will comment on this and maybe also answer the two questions I see in the questions button in this chat. Two questions from Luna Bianchi. I will answer because I don't have any more time otherwise, so I will try to summarize. On the question of competition and the trust issue. We are supportive as Parliament of the trust-based approach on AI that the Commission has developed. We started our work from that, and we think we can achieve a competitive model based on our fundamental values that is also capable of building trust in a not easy context like the one of the democracy, when you have to develop technological solutions involving such disruptive new innovations. So we are going in this direction. Also, the Parliament, in its paper that we will release, will go in the similar direction to the Commission. And we are also, as I said, convinced that we can develop a competition, a healthy competition, and also influence the other models in the world with being true to our values. That is to put the human being at the center, the human-centric approach, which is, as I said, unavoidable approach if we want to deal with the democratic context with AI. So we need to be ready to develop incentives, to develop spaces also for easier development of AI, to work on our cluster development of AI ecosystems that we have seen around Europe. We need to put enough investment, because it cannot be that only regulation is there. We need to have public and private investment, and we need the regulation to be also helpful to support investment. We have this understanding. On the questions that are being posed, there is a third one. So I will try to answer all the three, because then unfortunately I think have to leave. We are unfortunately very much into the Ukraine situation at the moment. Bad news coming now from Chernobyl also, that we need to see what is happening. So a very hectic day, but to be very frank, also our daily work in this very problematic moment is also important, that we look at this issue of our digital sovereignty and how we develop our model for AI and digital space, because that's also part of how we can be a strong Europe in a difficult world like the one we are in now. The question on, I asked the participants to read the questions, because this way I don't need to repeat them. The first question is on the definition of AI in Article 3, and on that I can tell you that we are looking on how to adjust the definition, in the sense that we want to be sure that no algorithm, that are no AI algorithms are included, because we need to be ambitious in the regulation, but we need to be also clear on what is part of the regulation and what is not part of it. I think we will push for also some general indication on algorithmic safety and health, but not we cannot transform the AI Act into the Algorithm Act. So we need to be careful, and probably we will try to do some adjustment. But when I say adjustment, it's because we are not convinced that we need to fundamentally change the definition that was proposed by the Commission. We need to tinker on it, but not change it radically. We think it's already quite balanced. On the conformity assessment to become or not a mechanical checklist, the point is we need to obviously put value into the legal responsibility that those that do the certification for themselves, the self-certification, have. So there must be checks, there must be resources for the authorities and for the public institutions to be able to guarantee a safety and a reality of the self-assessment, but then with clear responsibilities in the chain of the AI usage. And also we also need to imagine, I mentioned it earlier, imagine forms of ex-ante certification for the most dangerous, the most problematic high-risk users. So these can be ways to avoid the risk of having a mechanical checklist. Finally, on the issue of how we can reconcile different.
Sorry, Toby, if you want, we can ask this to Paolo because I think it might go.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
I understand that you have another engagement, so I'm just conscious of your time. This is just the as you prefer. If you want, we can address this with Paolo, and it is a question. And by the way, really thank you, because we appreciate these are in certain ways very dramatic times, and you giving us some of your time at these moments is really super appreciated. And we hope we will be able to continue this dialogue with you. And yes, even though there's some extreme times, it's actually even more important to look at the times ahead properly rather than improvising. So
thank you very much, and let's stay in touch, because it's important, as I said, to have a clear continuous dialogue with all the stakeholders involved in this very wide topic that we are trying to regulate from the European Parliament at this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
See you soon,
Thank you,
everyone. Thank you very
absolutely, thank you.
Bye.
And thank you. And Paolo, I think this question is from you. The question is from Giorgio Vulcano. I think there's a lot of Italians that are asking questions. I don't know why. We're trying to do these global webinars, and all of a sudden we try to colonize them. But this is really, again, by accident. But Giorgio Vulcano asked, this is a fantastic session. Thank you. And I would say thanks to Paolo and Brando. But a question for the speakers: how do you think we can reconcile different principles and ethical values? As companies, we often have a global reach, but must also respect local perceptions. How do we do that? Which values should we enforce? I give you 2 seconds to think about it, and I'll add something. I can't resist the temptation in saying we always have this tension. See what has happened with the data transfers, that, you know, there's these issues about transferring data from Europe and outside of Europe, and vice versa from other legislations, other blocks towards Europe. But still, we do have to exchange data. How do we reach a common consensus, a common level, other than imposing legislation that promotes more and more accountability and ways of making each company and players involved responsible, and making open and broad risk assessment? We've been discussing this also for the strategy, but Paolo, obviously you can say exactly the opposite, and feel free.
Well, thank you again also for the question. Well, first of all, I have to underline that when we talk about not an individual, but as an organization, usually we start to talk about organizational ethics and organizational culture. What does it mean? Every one of us live in an organization that could be an hospital, a bank, a society, government, everything that is present through artifact. An artifact could be everything. Could be the way in which we shape the building, or it could be the way in which is displays the chain of power inside an organization, because it's not spontaneous, it's made by man. Well, the artifact is the most visible layer that we see in society, but is also the most hard to decipher. When we make the line, when we are in a line to get a visitation from a medical doctor, this is the visible part of the organization, but it's not enough to explain the organization. Every artifact is lying on a set of assumed values. So, for example, coming back to the hospital, one of the values is to take care of the people in need, to take care of people sick. These core values are still based on some more deep value that are not expressed, but are the core value of society. So the first thing is to shape an organization. So the culture is an ethical culture in the sense that can have a bridge from the artifact to the core ethical level of the organization, and then from the core level back to the artifact. If we develop an ethical culture, means that ethics is not something that you simply drop and forget, but you keep alive, questioning artifact, questioning value, questioning core value to be back to the artifact. It's not enough that you change the artifact, to change the ethical posture of an organization through the society. So the ethical answer is to produce this movement inside the culture of an organization to obtain something that is alive, like ethics is alive. I personally make a lot of work with a lot of companies to produce that. To avoid a checklist, there is one of the former questions, it's simple to produce a culture. This culture, it's also open to the difference that you find in local places. Because, for example, the kindness or the gentleness, that means the attention to the one that you have in front of you, is the same core value, but is applied in a really different way in a different place around the world. And you can feel it as a brusqueness, I'm joking with some term, or you can find extremely kind. Well, this is because, you know, ethical is soft, it's not hard. And if I have to reply, to finish answering the question, with a famous definition of ethics given by Moulton, that was a judge of the former century in the United Kingdom. Moulton was used to say that ethics is the thing that is not doable by law. And he was used to express in that way. When people was on Titanic, and Titanic start to sink, and a voice shout, first woman and kids, and everyone let pass first woman and kids. That was ethics. It's not written in any law, but the culture produced that kind of shifting. So when we talk ethics inside the organization, we are talking to produce this kind of culture that is simple, something that give a lot of value, because it expresses also the commitment of all the men and women of the organization to the well-being and to the really precious value of the organization in itself. So I understand that probably talking in that way, it's not so common, but a lot of companies that are moving from shareholder to stakeholder are moving in the direction of ethics, of organizational ethics.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, very clear. And we will need to be able to apply laws that allow different cultures to talk. That's the real, that's going to be the real challenge. And I think we got 2 minutes left. We can try and be very quick. Burak Aytekin, sorry if I pronounce it wrongly. He says there's an AI talent shortage, particularly on deep learning. Do you think there are enough number of experts with regards to the enforcement side to understand and regulate artificial intelligence? I don't know if this is a question for you, Paolo. It is true that the big surveys say there's a shortage of talent.
What I did with some company is to develop a triage, an ethical triage. That means that you allow engineer, legal people, and others inside the company to question in technologies, to let arise what are the ethical issues or the legal issues. And you produce a sort of documentation, if you are practice with GitHub, inside GitHub, not only the software, but also a documentation. And there is also an ethical documentation. And this is something that will be passed to the user of that kind of artifact, of code artifact. So basically, one of the answers is producing this place inside the organization that is not only based on competence, but on discussion. What does it mean to have this kind of innovation? And what are the ethical phases that are put in challenge by that kind of transformation? It's much more complex and longer than that, but with 2 minutes, it's a 2 minutes explanation.
Absolutely brilliant. I now leave it to Alison, and we will meet again on all of us on the 31st of March for the next webinar. We'll be addressing overcoming the lack of specific regulation. But Alison, if you want to close, and I will be asking now publicly, you know, I can be very naughty. If in the future you will be hosting a webinar, you are our cybersecurity expert, a specific vertical on cybersecurity and AI. And by the way, so this is the first of a series. Paolo, thank you again. As you know, we would really love to listen to you more. And if you're available, we will be doing more of that, because you are also helping us in devising really creative and efficient ways of setting up a proper AI governance, which is our objective. So, Alison, do you want to close? And thanks to everyone. The floor to Alison.
Thank you so much. Thank you again to our panelists, Paolo, to Brendo, to Giangi, to Daria, Chiara, Marcela, for helping put this together, and also for all of the participants who asked such thoughtful questions and are clearly engaged in thinking about not just the legal risks, but also the ethics of AI governance and opportunities for the future as this technology becomes implemented on a broader scale. We're excited to be part of that dialogue with you. And again, we've put together a number of resources which are available on our AI Knowledge Hub site. And we'll be continuing to add to those in the weeks and months to come. We very much hope to see you all at our next session of the webinar Trilogy, which will be March 31st. So thank you again for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you the next time.
Thank you.